Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give everyone a minute to funnel in, and then we will get started. Just give it one more minute, and then we will start. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation on the state of global regulatory compliance 2026, digital submissions, UDI expansion, and evolving regulatory expectations. I'm Leah Wilhelm, Head of Marketing here at LexisNexis Life Sciences Solutions. And before we begin, please note that this webinar is being recorded and a link will be sent to you afterwards. For questions, please use the Q&A section, and we'll address as many of these questions as we can at the end. We'll start with introductions and then cover global UDI and database expansion, explore the shift to FHIR-based regulatory data exchange, and then wrap up with FAQs, or I'm sorry, Q&As. Now let's meet our panelists for today. John Lorenz is Director of Product Management at LexisNexis Life Sciences Solutions, where he leads the development of solutions that help pharmaceutical and medical device companies navigate complex global regulatory submission requirements. With a focus on compliance, efficiency, and customer success, John partners closely with cross-functional teams to deliver products that simplify regulatory challenges and drive operational excellence. Next is Sam Thompson, an independent consultant specializing in pharmaceutical data architecture. He helps organizations design and implement data strategies that support regulatory compliance, scalability, and operational efficiencies. Our moderator today is Amy Mayer. She is a patient-focused executive leader dedicated to accelerating the delivery of life-changing therapies, grounded in the belief that every day matters. She previously served as Chief Operating Officer at Evanova, an AstraZeneca incubated digital health company where she led global operations across quality, compliance, and commercial delivery. With deep experience across the R&D lifecycle and a track record of facilitating high-impact executive and cross-functional sessions, she brings clarity and alignment to complex challenges. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Leah, and I'm really excited to be here with both Sam and John today. And I just want to thank Leah for all her hard work in preparing for today's webinar. And I really just wanted to start out by really grounding us, I think, in a lot of, I think what John and Sam are going to talk about today, really across the industry. Really my time obviously as an operator and working with pharmaceutical companies, biotechnology companies, and life sciences software companies, and that there's a real shift, as I know John and Sam will talk about as well, and especially in the regulatory space, from my perspective, it's not subtle anymore. I think overall, from my conversations out in industry for a long time, we've talked a lot about, regulatory transformation, and it's been a lot of discussion. We've been talking about it coming, but from my perspective, it's here. And it's not just here, but it's really accelerating. And from my perspective, in conversations, we're moving away from fragmented processes and things that are very document heavy, from situations where we're being reactive, and we're moving towards things being much more structured, interoperable, data driven. And it isn't just about being compliant anymore. It's really about organizations thoughtfully planning for execution risk, speed to market, and ultimately thinking about the impact that all of this is really going to have at the end of the day on their revenue. Because at the end of the day, as we all know, unless regulatory systems really scale, submissions slow down, market access is delayed, and really costs compound in a way that if you don't plan for them, they're often invisible until it's too late. And I often talk to clients about this being, really referred to compliance debt. And a lot of organizations feel this when it's too late. And they need to really think about and be more proactive about evolving their operating models. And so I'm really excited today to be joined by Sam and John to be able to talk about, UDI expansion, what's going on with UDIMED, and really begin to think about how we work better overall within industry to really connect our regulatory infrastructure to not only just be compliant, but to really make sure that we think about holistically how we work to be more scalable, how we work to be more efficient, how we really work to make sure that organizations really drive towards a more modern overall footprint, to really ensure that digital health organizations and life sciences organizations are really set up to operate more effectively. So with that, John, I will turn things over to you.
All right. Thank you, Amy. So yeah, so John Lawrence, working product here at LexisNexis Life Sciences Solutions, and I've been working with um, electronic regulatory submissions for decades now. But for the last over about 15 years, I've had a direct, um, my primary focus has been UDI. So we've had a lot of activities, a lot of chatter about UDI ever since the FDA first required it back in, it was 2014, 2015. It's been so long now. It's oh my goodness, 2 kids ago for me, I believe. When it was first implemented, and now other countries are coming online following suit. And really, with 2026, we're seeing a big, emergence of various regulations coming in. We have Australia, Switzerland, and Europe with UDIMED, all essentially kicking off, going live close to the same time. So I first want to just start and just kind of level set a little bit of a primer on, what is UDI, which I'll cover here on the next slide, and then we'll kind of dive into some, what's forthcoming and some strategies to respond to this. So at a high level, from what is UDI, there was never a way to efficiently keep track of medical devices. Prior to you. Very simple as that, right? If there's a food recall for, a tainted bag of potato chips, it's easier to identify where that came from, who that was potentially sold to, than a pacemaker, right? You'd see the commercials when you're watching television. Have you been implanted with, blah, blah, blah? It's like that was like one way to get to people, where it's got to be more efficient than that. It's 2026, right? So UDI, essentially, it is a standardized identifier that is presented to a device model, which globally we really need to align on. A key component of this is global. This isn't a US unique device identifier, a European unique device identifier. Should be a globally unique device identifier for the product, which includes information about the device. So there'll be some characteristics there, such as, is this device package labeled as sterile? Is there latex involved within the product? Some more product level characteristics, as well as production identifier information. The PI, it's essentially made up of a DI and a PI, DI being the device characteristics and the PI being the production characteristics. This UDI gets applied to labels, packaging, and then there's a product record, which in many cases, and not all, but most cases, health authorities, when they require this, request that you not only update your labeling and assign these UDIs to products, you submit a set of product information to them for a national database that they create and maintain for all the devices that are marketed in their region. Why do regulators care? As I was saying, traceability and patient safety, that's a pretty big deal. I think there's no real arguments there. But there's also some efficiencies, some things that, Amy was referencing. So think about adverse event investigations, market surveillance. There's a way to tie those reports altogether very specific to, dare I say, with having the PI of UDI, the production lot that something was associated with. So really powerful stuff that I believe every country in the world would agree on. That is important to be tracking, maintaining, and ultimately, tying back to patients who have these particular devices, whether they're implants or what have you. A little bit here. Why does expansion matter? It's key that we have all this information everywhere that's marketed into every country. So you're going to see this continued increase, and we have been seeing it. As I mentioned back with the US over a decade ago, it was the first region where this was required. Anyone who's been around electronic submissions or other types of submissions, and whether in pharma, med device, probably experienced like, oh yeah, this is the way it's going to be done, and it's going to be done like that everywhere. And some of those initiatives took off, some of them didn't, but UDI definitely did. With the successful implementation in the US, we then started seeing Europe, which is the second biggest market for medical devices in the world. So you had the US go first, you have Europe going now. Just in a few months, really, UDI becoming required. And then we're starting to see some of the other regions, who are perhaps maybe sitting back, waiting and see. Let's see how the dust settles with US implementation. Let's see how it works out with EU, with UDI. But we have other regions coming around at the same time and coming in the next several years. So this isn't something that you just did 10 years ago, or you're just planning for doing this year. For Europe, it's a continuous exercise that, as the health authorities, the regulators, come up with their adoption of UDI, it really shouldn't be an interpretation, because for this stuff to work, we have to be, at a high level, be achieving the same or fulfilling the same requirements. But of course, as with anything else, things are a little bit different in each region. So it's not necessarily a complete rinse and repeat, but there's efficiencies you can gain to look to continue to build off of previous responses to regulations. So at a high level, we have this labeling concept where your labeling is updated. There's the product data, which may not have been all together at the time of the requirement coming out. It might have been information you never had to submit for, but now it's like, okay, we have to take this on and kind of enhance the way we've been doing product data management for medical devices. And then lastly, the database submissions, which are not a one-time event. It's you submit that information, you maintain that information, so the power of the data gets to live on and not become stale at some point.
So John, I mean, as I listen to you, and obviously from the organizations, I've obviously worked with related to any type of transformation, obviously, as you talked about, any type of change, especially in this industry, obviously with organizations can be a big deal. So I mean, in your experience, what's the lead time required to sufficiently prepare, for this type of new submission requirement? What do you think
Yep.
it's going to take for an organization that isn't doing it to be able to sufficiently do it?
Mm-hmm. Say on average, I see about a 6-month period, but it depends on when you start. So I've worked with, I had the pleasure to work with over 200 medical device manufacturers who have complied with UDI over the years. And there's a variance in when folks start, right? And there's fear of regulations getting delayed, and everybody's trying to maximize, the efficient uses of their resources and so forth. But ultimately, about a 6-month period is needed, but that doesn't mean you start just when everything gets finalized and the icing's on the cake, here you go. As
Yeah.
many times health authorities do that, and they're like, all right, and everything's due in a month.
Yeah.
So you really have to take advantage of these. They typically have early pilot programs, pre-production environments to get involved, to really take advantage of um, those things that are provided to you, so that you can hopefully when things get finalized and then it's going to be implemented in a few months, you're really just kind of tweaking. You're not starting from scratch. But ultimately, it's it's been about a 6 month ramp up. Again, give or take, depending on the size of the organization. If you just have a handful of devices, the effort could be less. And if you've done UDI in other regions and you're building upon what you've done, it could be much less. But just coming in completely blind, I'd say about a 6 month period.
So it sounds like there's some readiness activities they can be doing ahead of time so that it's not,
Yeah,
happening. The startup isn't happening rapidly.
exactly. Exactly. So yeah, so moving on to the next slide, just want to, emphasize what's happening. Really, this is this year. Um, we've been working with for folks that have been engaged with UNIMED preparations. This has been going on for many years, right? So this is UNIMED might be a cause for some folks to be like, okay, well, is it really going to happen? Is this going to get delayed again? I'm here to say we've lived through that already, and it's really, this May it's real with having to register your devices into the UNIMED database. The commission has done a lot over the years on restructuring kind of what they could do through the regulation to allow for a gradual rollout of UDIMED. This has been a whole nother, it's a whole nother animal. Compare this to other um, um, regions of the world, whereas UDIMED's not just UDI. UDI is one module within this multi-module system that they're developing to really revolutionize how they're doing managing medical device data in the European Union. So they've come up with this phased approach, which kicks off May 28th of this year, which basically gives a window of time for you to get all of your devices registered into their database. So there's a big push that's going to be starting very soon for this database, and I'm not expecting there's going to be a lot of leeway with the European Commission, considering this has been one that's been going on for years and years. So if you're, getting behind the eight ball in preparation for this, I'm not sure how much of a grace period you're going to receive, where they're going to say, hey, technically this should have been done in 2020, which we know was not going to happen with
Mhm.
the pandemic and everything. But that was the original May 28th, 2026 date was 2020. So there's been a
Wow.
lot of activity and preparation to get to where we are today. Um, from a Switzerland perspective, this one's very interesting because this is more of the hurry up go because they're not officially part of the European Union. They cannot leverage UDIMED as their source of data for this information. So what do? They create SwissDomed. They create their own little UDIMED. Um, I will say this is not as doesn't have as many modules. It doesn't go all the way into vigilance tracking and so forth, but it has the actor registration and the device registration module, which then brings in UDI. You have to do UDI submissions. This has a database also already available for voluntary use, and their timeline is really going to kick off basically 1 month after UNIMED kicks off to start getting all of the devices registered in that database as well. You may think, okay, I've done UNIMED. I'm just going to press an easy button to make SwissDomed so. It's although it's designed similar to UDIMED, it does have its little differences in the way that it operates. So it really does deserve its own focus, attention, and planning on how to comply with SwissDomed in addition to UDIMED, more so than just I'm just going to reuse what I did. There's definitely specific steps that are going to have to be taken. We are expecting as with these databases, there's typically a way to manually enter your data into their systems. So you just key the stuff in, or you upload a spreadsheet, and those features are essentially designed for organizations that have less data that they have to register. Right? If you have 100,000 GTINs that have to be registered in the database, you're probably not going to be wanting to manually key those in. And then also think about the impacts of how you manage the change control of that going forward. A whole mess you don't want to get into. So they also offer these machine-to-machine capabilities where systems can connect to their database and essentially automatically submit information, receive responses back from the health authority with the state of the registration attempt that they're making. So SwissDomed is really, I mean, we're up, I think it's like in a month, or not a month, I'm sorry, a week, we expect to get an update to their playground environment that has machine-to-machine capabilities, so that, we could react quickly to get that connected and make those submission transmissions. So that is, again, another thing on our plate for this year. But we must not forget about our friends in Australia. They've been working on their implementation also for several years. Really, a little impartial to Australia. I really liked working with that team at the TGA as part of the working group on getting this up and running. I think they did a lot of great surveying of industry on, again, they had the big two to reference. Okay, most people have done US and they're working towards Europe. Tell me what you like, don't like about those different implementations. And I feel like they applied that feedback on how they're approaching it. So much so that they're very closely adopting what the US did with their implementation, using HL7 SPL, which Sam in a little bit will talk about HL7 FHIR, but even using the same data standard, which was pretty remarkable. And I'd say opening up the door to essentially get to perhaps reuse some of the efforts that you've applied to the US and apply those to Australia to help with meeting compliance. But the kicker is, as we jump to the next slide, what we're going to see is it's all happening at the same time. It's a UDI explosion this year. We go from, an implementation with the US over a decade ago, UDI, people are wondering if it's ever really going to happen, which it is, to now just, it's like the perfect storm. And so much so everything's within like a month of each other. So starting off with UDI, we have, and it's been voluntary use since October 2021. So this is back where what I was saying, where I don't think the commission's going to be like, well, you didn't have enough time. Now you could probably argue and say what you gave us at October 2021 wasn't really sufficient to get the job done, because they were still building their systems and capabilities. But still, they did. There's probably some political reasons why they did that, push that out. Hey, you could potentially do it. It might take you 5 hours to do one device, but you can technically do it. But now we're into a more mature phase now where the audit of the particular module has successfully passed. The notification went out through the official journal of the European Union that it is mandated for use May 28th, 2026. So it doesn't really get any more official than that. And they're essentially giving this 6-month period to get all of your devices reported. So that's a very big second half of this year, especially if you have a large device catalog of a profile, a lot of devices, a lot of work that has to be done just for Europe. There's some, as with anything else, there's going to be some nuances, and there's regulations about things like legacy devices, so MDD devices from or directive devices before the MDR regulation came in play. So there are some nuances to which can impact when you're submitting, but the vast majority of everything MDR related is the starting point is 2 months away. Switzerland, as I mentioned, they said, we're going to give you some time after UDI to respond to us. We'll give you another month and a couple days. So you have that July 1st, which is wild because we were actually a part of a little bit of like a survey review with Swissmedic last fall, where everyone kind of knew SwissMed was going to come after UDI. Like it certainly was not going to go first, but when was it going to be? And they reached out to some folks in industry. We did some review of their approach to UDI, which also include their timing. And I remember we asked a question going, considering UDI in Australia coming off, is there, this is potentially going to be more time given for manufacturers to reply with this, and Swissmedic felt that it was sufficient time. So I think we could all be the judge of that, but it is what it is. We have to start showing progress with submissions beginning at the beginning of July this year, going out until the end of this year. the same approach as with UDI, with there could be some legacy devices and different specifics for the types of devices and when they are submitted. But right now, with these first two line items, you're looking at, you know, essentially full inventory that's sold in these markets. You got to get it submitted by the end of this year. Lastly, with Australia, we have a little bit more of a break, and you're going to see more of the FDA inspired approach. When I say break, I'm just meaning they're chunking out the submission deadlines by device risk class. So also today, they have, you know, they have a system in place. There, you can technically be doing this now. In March of this year is when they really had everything in place where you could start submitting, and they're expecting your class 3s and 2Bs to all be in the database by July 1st. And then you'll see in 2027, 28, 29, there's other device classes that will have their own deadlines, very similar, again, to how the US went with their implementation. I will say that, you know, this could look scary. The worst place to be is to be not prepared at all. I've experienced with manufacturers that, you know, may get started late, but as long as you're showing goodwill progress towards meeting that goal, and there's various signals that will show that to the health authority, like you're applying for the accounts, you're doing the testing submissions. That's all, you know, provable of what you're doing. You know, you should be in the good graces, but of course, no one wants to take a chance. We want to get everything done by the actual compliance deadline.
So I guess my wish for one of my questions was going to be, do we think the Swiss will delay? But I guess I'll leave that question for. I'll skip that question. But what do you, just from your experience and obviously working with companies, I mean, what's the most friction that you're seeing with companies really trying to operationalize all these requirements? Like, where are people running into the most trouble so far?
Yep. I would say with the data itself, when these things start formulating, let's say it starts off with some sort of draft guidance of or intended approach for a UDI implementation, it all seems rather familiar. There's a high level list of bulleted points of we're looking for storage and handling information. We're looking for clinically relevant size and description, and folks will go, oh wow, we already did that. This should be easy. But you know, the devil is in the details. Well, the first key thing that we look at is, okay, that's great. The guidance document's awesome. It's coming, but show me the data dictionary. And you know, Sam would probably appreciate this. It's like that's where the real rules are. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, they're asking the same question, but in this particular country, do I provide the same answer? And that type of analysis that needs to be done to really be successful, I believe is at least, and I can be biased because obviously I work with the submissions with these things, but it's very important analysis to know not only are you complying by getting your submissions done in time, but are you doing it correctly? Is the data going to be interpreted the way that it should be? So it's I noticed that as being the big hang up. It's not like all these organizations have had these mature global medical device product teams and master data strategies for years where it's like, oh, okay, just plug it into this and submit this data. It's like, no, the need, at least from a regulatory standpoint, wasn't there, but now it's here.
Mhm.
So I see companies with their own kind of master data dictionaries, right? So they'll gather all the data attributes that are appropriate for the regions in which they sell their products. As a data dictionary comes in from a health authority, you know, you got to re-review it to their definition so that they build their own standardized approach. And that's just the start. Because then it's like, okay, we're talking data stewards. How's this data change control
Yeah.
over these attributes, especially if you want to reuse data to various health authorities. So that's by far been the top thing from my perspective. Other road bumps are things like, okay, you're in that testing period, things might not be functioning totally as expected. and there's some back and forth perhaps with the health authority on that, but ultimately data preparation, I'd say.
And then lastly, and then maybe what we'll do is we'll shift over to Sam as, yeah, obviously if one of our attendees is listening and they're getting a slow start with this, I mean, what does sort of good readiness and getting started right now look like? Like what advice would you give someone who might be sitting here saying, I'm a little behind, you know,
Mhm.
I need to get caught up with this.
Yep.
What does that good readiness look like? Obviously, there's a lot here to do. I see
Yeah.
the dates ahead of me. Like, what advice would you give them?
Right. So I would say that, for each of these that are coming into place this year, um, the first thing you have to do is, are you impacted by this? Hopefully that's been done. At least you're aware that you sell your products in these regions. Um, but each health authority is offering, they're all kind of in this voluntary, if you will, period. And they have their pre-production environments, which can be used to do some test submissions to start, um, you know, understanding what does this mean to your organization with this type of data being requested, so you can start developing some process and quality controls around how you're going to respond to this. With organizations like, um, they might have a technical solution, but there's a process piece to this that
Absolutely.
really needs to have that, respect given to it. As a reference, I think I'm sure we'll be giving out the slides. Like I do have just like 5 points of things that could be a guide to get moving, for one or all of these initiatives. But I'd say you really got to get started now.
Hmm.
And if you're impacted by all three of these, unfortunately, we really got to start them all kind of at the same time and perform those same steps, getting test environments together, start showing the health authority that you're okay. We see you in the test system. You're not someone once they start querying this stuff past the deadlines and you're completely invisible to them. You don't want to be in that um, stage. You want to be in the folks where even if maybe you didn't get everything done, they saw that you're making progress towards complying with the initiative.
No, that's great advice. And just, obviously there's especially with things being behind and delayed, there's obviously, just trying to keep up and getting started and, just getting caught up, obviously, with all the work that
Right.
needs to do. Um, So with that, Sam, I think maybe what we'll do is we'll transition to you, and then obviously we'll continue to keep a watch on the Q&A, and then we'll come back at the end, John, if there's any questions for you as well. So with
Perfect.
that, Sam, we'll transition over to you.
Great. Thanks, John. Very interesting stuff. And you're right. It's a lot of fun to watch. It sounds a lot like the IDMP story. Um, are we going to go? We're not going to go. We're going to go. We're not going to go. And um, eh, I think that kind of has been the story between across any major regulatory deadline. So let's talk a little bit about FHIR-based regulatory data exchange and how the industry, the world is kind of moving towards that. It's been around, FHIR's been around for a long time, and it's been used heavily on the healthcare side, um, for billing, for all sorts of, provider information going back and forth. So it's not unique to the life sciences industry. And over time, I think organizations that have been, manufacturers that have been playing on the healthcare side realize that there's a way to actually move over to the regulatory side, the clinical side, even the safety side. So there are some, both from a regulatory perspective, some initiatives that have been introduced, and there's also industry-led initiatives to come up with standards for data submission using FHIR. So first thing I want to do though is just sort of just put everybody kind of at the same baseline on what FHIR is and what it even stands for. So it's fast healthcare interoperability resources. A lot of people think FHIR is a database format, and it's a data exchange standard. So it's really how do you move data from one place to another in a consistent way so that agencies or I guess endpoints can talk to each other in a consistent way, even when their data itself doesn't actually look the same way. Um, it's on the technical side, it's developer friendly. There's a lot of ways that you can use existing standards, whether it's HTTP, REST, JSON, or JSON. I kept always looking for the A in JSON for the longest time. Um, I think the most important thing about FHIR is its modularity, and it's so important that it's actually the fourth word in the mnemonic. It's resources. So it's fast. The idea is that things can move quickly from one to another. You can have very quick, efficient data exchange. Healthcare speaks for itself. Interoperability, again, the idea that you're moving data across landscapes of different types of organizations. But the real thing I want to talk about, because the key to understanding and using FHIR effectively is the resource itself. And a resource is sort of characterized by having a logical identifier. So it starts to look, and then one of the reasons I think people might correctly or not correctly, but rightfully assume that FHIR is a database itself, because the core thing, the core piece of FHIR, the resource, is it looks like a table spec when you get right down to it. So it's got an identifier, it's got metadata, and it has elements, or we some people might call them fields, but it has elements made up of different data types that are specific to each resource. And the key to using FHIR is A, understanding what resources are available. And in the most recent release, the V6 version or release of FHIR has 126 different resources. So again, there's a lot there already for the healthcare world. Um, it's been tweaked and moved around. There's been implementation more for submission of pharmaceutical data now. So some new resources have been introduced. Um, so it's growing and moving, and there's also actually some baked in information for devices as well. So as the need for or the demand for FHIR grows, so does the supply of new resources and new ways to use resources to meet that demand. The last thing I'll say about resources before we go look at an example of one, and I can't take credit for this analogy. My friend Corey Hiddle, who's probably on the call, is Danish, big fan of Legos because that's where Legos come from. One of the cool things about resources is they can be stacked together like certain resources. If you want to accomplish something that one on its own can't accomplish, they really are capable of being clipped together so that you could have like a device and a device, something else. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but you can have multiple resources that stand alone but can be used together. That's the power of FHIR. In addition to that, the power of FHIR comes from being able to take existing resources and extend them by adding custom tweaks, if you will, that still fit the overall spirit of FHIR, but maybe have some unique functionality for your particular need. So we're going to go to the next slide. We can take a look at what a resource looks like. So you take those 126 resources. There's a whole, if you go to the, in my presentation in the next couple of pages, there's actually a link to this one. But if you go to the HL7 website, you can find the FHIR resource, I'm sorry, release number 6. I pulled this one down just because it's kind of relevant. If you need to press your control key and roll your mouse to make it get bigger, but I just want to point out some key components, some key points here. Here's the device. So this is actually a device called, a resource that's called device. It's got an identifier right here. And it has multiple elements and even sub-elements um, that serve as carriers of information from one place to another. There's, I don't want to go into tons of detail because we could spend all the remaining time talking about a resource definition for device, but I'm going to refer back to this in the presentation. I just want you all to have kind of like a visual image of what the device resource looks like and what individual elements look like. So let's spring forward and talk about FHIR's use in life sciences today. So on the medicine side, there's, obviously there's IDMP, and in Europe there's the EMA PMS initiative, where basically they're accepting now FHIR-based submissions for products, for centrally acknowledged products. So that's on the product side. Jordan has implemented, and really kind of like amazing story. They implemented a specification for EPI, adopted using Vulcan's FHIR specification, and that is now how label our EPI data is product information data is submitted in Jordan today. So way far ahead of anything we're doing in the US and even in the UK. I think probably because they're a smaller regional area, they were able to do that, but pretty fascinating. And then on this side of the pond, there are a couple of pilots that are working, one with Module 3 quality data, the PQCMC initiative. There's actually one that was sort of piloted by FDA itself, and one that was initiated by industry as well. And then there's a SPL initiative also being led by FDA, still in the pilot phase, but as you can see, there's a growing use of being able to submit different types of data to regulatory authorities across different regions, and that's the strength of FHIR. On the device side, not so much yet. The I guess you could say the regulatory authority, most people don't move until there's enough pain to make them move, right? And so nobody's saying that you have to use FHIR to submit device information. A lot of places are still, as we've learned, a lot of places are still getting genned up to submit device information to begin with. So there hasn't been any kind of major kick in the tail to move industry or move anyone really to use FHIR to submit information. But there has been some subtle movement, and this is why I wanted to show you that FHIR resource. If you go to the next page, there are a couple of initiatives going on that actually HL7 has sort of given a tip of the cap, or sort of a hint that there's going to be the ability to include device information in some of their standards. So for instance, we were looking at the device resource. Inside of that device resource, there's a device definition, and it actually maps to some specific UDI dictionary fields. In the specification itself, it says that, and again, it's not so much important that you can remember this. I've given you the reference here. It's not so important that you remember this, but just the idea that there are a couple different places where there are different additional product description and the UDID, they literally are baked into the FHIR device definition, and this is in release 6 as well. In release 5, device definition also includes a regulatory support identifier. It's called regulatory identifier. It also includes a market distribution identifier. So it's really kind of cool that even though there's no industry or there's no RA pressure to do this, the HL7 and people building out implementation guides for FHIR are thinking ahead and preparing us for the eventual use of FHIR in device submissions. There's also something that, I mean, it literally is hot off the presses, if you will. The Caliper FHIR Accelerator in implementation community, and this is kind of how things started with uh, PQCMC, SPL, and other FHIR initiatives that ended up coming up with standards for implementation guides with standards for submitting data to regulatory authorities or submitting data between institutions. There's another one now that's basically focused on how medical and personal health device data can be exchanged. Does it mean that we're going to have FDA demands for using it tomorrow? Probably not. But again, this is, and I think where this will be even more successful, this is industry led. And so it's a recognition that we can actually drive value for our industry and our individual companies following a common data exchange standard. And I think that speaks to what I'm thinking in terms of regulatory timelines. We talked about it's been 6 years since UDIMED was going to be live. Maybe this is a 3-year window. That's still really fast in terms of what we see for submission or for regulatory authorities kind of demanding demanding, requiring data format and submissions that way.
Yeah, Sam, that's pretty quick for the regulatory industry,
Yeah.
considering how long some other things have taken. The one question I had as you were going through this was, if you think about like the technical hurdles that exist to creating a FHIR device implementation guide. I mean, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the concept of interoperability is a big lift for any organization or industry. And this is whether you're doing regular, life sciences data, financial data, anything where you kind of go from more of a this is how I do it here to this is how I'm going to comply with everyone. There's always organizational, I guess everyone uses the term headwind. Maybe that's an old term now, but headwind. So that's not really technical, but it is a significant, impediment. Um, Probably the biggest, in my mind, the biggest, because I'm a data guy anyway, is that legacy data models and legacy data infrastructure, some of it's real legacy, really, really, really legacy, and the ability to be able to be flexible enough to adapt to a model like FHIR could be one impediment, I'm sorry, to the implementation of FHIR, particularly, um, if you're looking at, I don't think anybody's using COBOL in life sciences anymore, but if you're looking at some of the older database standards, that definitely could be an impediment, or having really kind of insufficient infrastructure to support messaging to begin with. Um, let's see. Well, I see this even when I was doing a lot of IDMP work. Uh, Different parts of the organization view the same data differently. So when it comes time to putting that data together, a product and a product, it's not really the same thing.
Yeah,
That's a significant impediment. And there needs to be you're either talking about changing data on one end or the other, or writing something in the middle to massage that. That's a big technical implement.
yeah,
And
agreed.
in any kind of open data exchange, security is always going to be an issue. And I think everybody well, it's just the world we live in. Security is always going to be an issue. And I think, um, that probably would inhibit somebody who's on the fence, the cost of, you know, uh, safeguarding yourself could be really heavy, and that might be just enough to prevent you from taking the leap.
Yep. Agreed.
So this last slide is certainly not it's not what I would call a cookbook or anything like that. It's if you were starting out on the path of, say, you wanted to build your own implementation guide for UDIMED for FHIR, um, what would that look like? What would it look like if in the end, or what would you be working with in terms of existing FHIR resources? So, for instance, the actor registration, there is an organizational profile in FHIR. You're going to need to extend it. Excuse me. You're going to need to extend it to include the single registration number. There's probably going to be other extensions in there, but that's probably the big one that there's just nothing in there right now. But FHIR is flexible enough to be able to handle that. Um, the UDI device registration module, again, there's a device definition profile in FHIR. So building in some additional extensions for UDIMED specific fields. And next thing you know, you've got the ability to manage that data. Again, this is not something that happens overnight. It is a bit of a process. But without going through each one, I think you all can read each one of these. The point I was trying to make here is that there are already existing core resources in FHIR that can be either used or extended to be used to meet each one of the six modules of UDIMED data, and even down to there's an adverse events profile for FHIR. So it makes if you have get nothing else to do for the next 2 years, it'd be a really cool thing to do to hop on that bandwagon. And I guess I'll just finish with the FHIR community is my experience has been it's a really um, energetic, collaborative community. People break down the barriers between organizations and even jurisdictions because they're all really psyched to solve a problem. And it's still a small enough community that it's kind of almost like a movement. And there's a lot of energy within that community, particularly when you think about big pharma or even smaller pharma. But when you think about the speed with which things change traditionally in our industry, this is kind of lightning movement stuff. So I'll close with that and see if there's anything else to answer.
So my last question, Sam, and then Leah will probably be moving towards wrapping up. I mean, Sam, I'm thinking sitting here, obviously the work that I do, doing advisory and talking to, regulatory teams. I mean, as you said, this is something that's like really changing how teams work. I mean, how does this shift really change, or as you think about moving forward, really the role of like a regulatory team? This seems like a really big change. So I'm just thinking, like, as we move forward, like, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's a big shift, to be honest. And as with any sort of technology-driven, enterprise-wide initiative, um, it does cause, I guess, some segment of the population is going to feel uncomfortable and maybe not be as excited by it. But if you think about it, you're going to move a lot of people who are basically been focused on publishing. You're going to really move them to being more stewards of data, the data governance term, data stewardship, where you really there's a base of knowledge, or SMEs, if you will, in regulatory in every company, and every company is unique, and it's common interface, but unique information. So suddenly you've got a lot of people who have a lot of information that will be able to maintain the data because the data is what drives everything. Um, hmm. along those lines, I think with anything, when you're not doing necessarily day-to-day work, you can start thinking more strategically than tactically. So I think instead of figuring out how to publish faster, people are going to figure out, you're going to have people thinking more like, well, how do I get the right data faster? How do I solve this problem X, Y, and Z? And so I think it does allow folks to step up and step out of the kind of the day-to-day grind. Not everybody likes that. Um, and my guess is there'll probably be more vendors, more technology in that space. So in order to support FHIR and the growth of data. And you'll probably have some people that will move into more of an oversight role to oversee, again, not so much worried about day to day, but strategically what vendors are positioned to do the right thing. So I think it does change the dynamic, what the organization looks like. It's still got the same remit, but I think people will be doing more um, dynamic and thoughtful work than necessarily they're doing always today. And like I said at the beginning, some people will probably lose out because they're not interested or prepared or whatever to take on that kind of role. You don't do these kinds of big initiatives and not expect to save money somewhere. And I would assume that some of that would be on the organization side, which is unfortunate. And at the same time, the opportunity for people to learn and grow is always there.
John, anything to add before we turn things over to Leah to wrap up?
Um, I really liked Sam's presentation because you can see as what we're doing with UDI, we're, making things traceable. But I think what we're seeing here with FHIR is, love seeing that they're embedding some device information in there and, kind of excited to see what the future could hold to help ultimately solve the problem of sharing this data everywhere.
It's cool.
Thank you.
And with that, Leah, I will turn things
Yeah.
back to you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for joining us today. If we missed your questions, we will follow up via email along with the recording. And once the webinar commences, you will be prompted to fill out a brief survey. And if you want to continue the conversation with us here at LexisNexis, please respond yes to the last question. And you can contact us and learn more about our solutions by going to our website at readtech.com. And I invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated on all of our upcoming webinars. And thank you again for attending and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.